That tattoo behind your ear, I've only seen that mark on 3 people in my entire career. All of them were in the Phoenix Squadron, and they were all legends.
I'm not sure what you're talking about, sir.
She asked to fly the Apache simulator. What they found behind her ear changed everything. Sarah Chen stood quietly asking to use the Apache simulator while 2 cocky flight instructors mocked her civilian clothes. When Air Marshal Harrison spotted the tiny tattoo behind her ear, the mark of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment's most elite tier, the woman they dismissed revealed herself as Phoenix 6, a legendary pilot whose impossible missions had become whispered legends. The desert sun beat down mercilessly on the tarmac at Desert Ridge Air Base as Sarah Chen approached the Flight Operations Building, her simple civilian clothes, khaki pants, and a plain white blouse, drawing curious glances from uniformed personnel. At 38, she moved with the quiet confidence of someone comfortable in her own skin. Her black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail that revealed the graceful line of her neck. The air shimmered with heat waves rising from the concrete, carrying the familiar scent of jet fuel and the metallic tang of aircraft maintenance. Sarah paused at the entrance, her dark eyes scanning the building that housed some of the most advanced flight simulators in the world, including the AH-64 Apache trainer she'd come to use. "Ma'am, can I help you?" asked Corporal Martinez at the reception desk, his tone polite but puzzled by the appearance of a civilian in what was clearly a restricted military facility. "I have authorization to use the Apache simulator," Sarah said quietly, producing a set of papers that bore official seals and signatures from levels of command that made the young corporal's eyes widen. "I'll need to get Lieutenant Thompson," Martinez said, reaching for his phone. "He's the senior flight instructor today." As Sarah waited in the air-conditioned lobby, she could hear the distant roar of helicopters conducting training flights, the sound triggering memories she'd spent years trying to suppress. The familiar weight of a flight helmet, the vibration of rotor blades, the split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death, all of it came flooding back with the intensity of a desert storm. Lieutenant Jake Thompson emerged from the simulator bay, his flight suit crisp and his aviator's sunglasses reflecting the overhead lights. At 29, he carried himself with the swagger of someone who'd never been told he couldn't do something, his chest bearing the wings that marked him as a qualified Apache pilot. "You're the civilian who wants simulator time?" Thompson asked, his tone carrying the barely concealed amusement of someone dealing with what he assumed was another military groupie. "Ma'am, I have to ask, do you have any flight experience at all?" "Some," Sarah replied simply, her voice carrying no defensiveness, despite the obvious skepticism in Thompson's voice. Thompson's partner, Lieutenant Mike Rodriguez, joined the conversation with a smirk that suggested he'd heard this before. "Lady, the Apache simulator isn't a video game. It's a multi-million-dollar training system for combat pilots." True skill speaks louder than assumptions, Sarah thought, remembering words her fallen comrade had once spoken. She remained silent, her authorization papers speaking for themselves, but she could feel the weight of their assumptions settling around her like the desert heat outside. "Look, ma'am," Thompson said, glancing at Sarah's authorization papers with the kind of skepticism reserved for documents that seemed too good to be true. "I don't know who signed off on this, but the Apache simulator requires extensive pre-flight briefing safety protocols and basic understanding of rotary wing aerodynamics. The air conditioning hummed steadily in the background, providing relief from the desert heat, while the distant sound of rotor blades created a rhythmic backdrop to the conversation. Sarah stood patiently, her hands clasped behind her back in a posture that would have been familiar to anyone with military training. "I understand the requirements," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying no trace of irritation despite the obvious condescension in Thompson's tone. "Do you?" Rodriguez interjected, stepping closer with the kind of aggressive body language meant to intimidate. "Because this isn't some civilian flight school where you pay money and get to play pilot for an hour. This is military equipment worth more than most people's houses." Sarah's eyes met Rodriguez's with steady calm, showing no reaction to his attempt at intimidation. "I'm aware of the Apache's capabilities and value, Lieutenant." Thompson exchanged glances with Rodriguez, both men sharing the kind of look that suggested they'd dealt with delusional civilians before. The lobby's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across their faces as they made their assessment of the quiet woman before them. "Ma'am, with all due respect," Thompson said, his tone suggesting anything but respect, "the AH-64 Apache is one of the most complex aircraft in the world. It requires years of training to operate safely even in simulation. We can't just let anyone walk in off the street, and my authorization comes from General Patterson at SOCOM." Sarah interrupted gently, her voice remaining calm despite the growing tension in the room. "SOCOM," Rodriguez laughed, the sound echoing off the lobby's tile walls. "Lady, I don't know what kind of connections you think you have, but Special Operations Command doesn't send housewives to play with Apache simulators." Despite their skepticism, the authorization papers were legitimate enough that Thompson and Rodriguez couldn't simply turn Sarah away. Instead, they relegated her to a plastic chair in the lobby while they verified her credentials through official channels, a process they deliberately stretched to test her patience. "This could take hours," Thompson warned, his tone suggesting he hoped she'd give up and leave. "Military bureaucracy moves slowly, especially for unusual requests." Sarah nodded and settled into the uncomfortable chair, her posture remaining straight despite the obvious attempt to make her uncomfortable. The lobby's air conditioning cycled on and off, creating temperature fluctuations that made the wait even more unpleasant. As the morning stretched into afternoon, Sarah remained motionless, except for the occasional sip from a water bottle she'd brought. Her patience was remarkable, showing none of the fidgeting or complaints that Thompson and Rodriguez had expected from a civilian facing military inefficiency. "She's still here," Rodriguez muttered to Thompson during one of their periodic checks. "Most people would have given up by now." "Maybe she's more serious than we thought," Thompson replied, though his tone suggested he still doubted Sarah's qualifications. Air Marshal David Harrison had been observing the situation from his office window, watching as the two flight instructors deliberately delayed a civilian who clearly had legitimate authorization. At 55, Harrison had seen enough military politics to recognize deliberate obstruction when he saw it. More importantly, something about the woman's bearing had caught his attention. The way she sat, the way she held her head, the complete lack of fidgeting or impatience, it all suggested someone with extensive military training despite her civilian clothes. Harrison made his way down to the lobby, his rank insignia drawing immediate attention from Thompson and Rodriguez, who snapped to attention as he approached. "Gentlemen," Harrison said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that came from decades of command. "I believe this lady has been waiting quite some time for simulator access." "Sir, we're still verifying her credentials," Thompson replied, though his voice lacked conviction. Harrison studied Sarah's face, noting the calm composure that marked her as someone comfortable with authority. But it was when she turned her head slightly that he saw something that made his blood run cold, a small tattoo behind her left ear, barely visible beneath her hair. The mark of the Phoenix Squadron, the most classified unit within the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. "Ma'am," Harrison said, his voice suddenly carrying deep respect, "I believe we need to talk." Air Marshal Harrison's office was a shrine to military aviation, its walls lined with photographs of aircraft from every era of flight, while the scent of leather and old books mixed with the faint aroma of coffee from his personal machine. Sarah sat across from his desk, her civilian clothes a stark contrast to the military memorabilia surrounding them. "That tattoo behind your ear?" Harrison said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of classified knowledge. "I've only seen that mark on 3 people in my entire career. All of them were Phoenix Squadron, and all of them were legends." Sarah's expression remained neutral, but Harrison caught the slight tightening around her eyes that confirmed his suspicions. "I'm not sure what you're referring to, sir," Sarah said, her voice steady, despite the magnitude of what was being discussed. "The Phoenix Squadron has different classifications within their ranks." Harrison continued, pulling out a classified manual that few people outside Special Operations had ever seen. The standard Night Stalker insignia is well known, but there's another mark, one given only to pilots who've flown missions so classified that their existence is denied by the government. Harrison opened the manual to a page showing various military tattoos and their meanings. The image matched exactly what he glimpsed behind Sarah's ear, a stylized phoenix rising from flames surrounded by 6 stars. "Phoenix 6, Harrison said, watching Sarah's reaction carefully. "That was your call sign, wasn't it?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her hands folded in her lap as she weighed her response. Outside the office windows, the desert heat created shimmering mirages that seemed to dance across the tarmac. "Phoenix 6 was retired 5 years ago," she said finally, her voice carrying the weight of memories that would never be officially acknowledged. "Retired or erased?" Harrison asked gently. "Both." Harrison activated a secure computer terminal and pulled up files that required his personal authorization to access. The classified documents painted a picture of missions that had never officially happened, conducted by pilots whose skills bordered on the supernatural. "Operation Desert Phoenix, Afghanistan, 2018, Harrison read from the screen. "Single Apache helicopter insertion into Taliban-controlled territory to extract a downed Special Operations team. Pilot designation, Phoenix 6. Sarah's expression remained carefully neutral, but Harrison could see the tension in her shoulders as he recounted details of a mission that had cost her everything. "The extraction zone was surrounded by enemy forces," Harrison continued. "Standard protocol called for air support and ground reinforcement before attempting rescue, but the team was taking heavy casualties and couldn't wait for backup." "Sir, I'm not sure why you're telling me this," Sarah said quietly. "Because Phoenix 6 flew that mission alone," Harrison replied, his voice filled with admiration. "One helicopter against an entire Taliban battalion. The official report says it was impossible that no single pilot could have executed the maneuvers required to extract that team. Harrison pulled up gun camera footage that showed an Apache helicopter performing maneuvers that defied conventional understanding of rotary wing flight. The aircraft seemed to dance through enemy fire using terrain and weather in ways that shouldn't have been possible. 12 American Special Operations soldiers came home that night because of Phoenix 6, Harrison said. But the mission was so far outside normal parameters that it was classified beyond top secret. Phoenix 6 was officially retired to protect operational security. "Why are you here?" Harrison asked, his voice gentle but insistent. "Phoenix 6 doesn't just show up at a training base asking for simulator time without a reason." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Her eyes focused on a photograph on Harrison's wall showing a formation of Apache helicopters in flight. The image seemed to trigger memories that she'd spent years trying to process. "I made a promise," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "To whom?" "To my co-pilot, Staff Sergeant Michael Torres. He was killed during the extraction, took a sniper round while providing covering fire for the ground team." Harrison felt the weight of her words settling over the office like a heavy blanket. He'd read about Torres in the classified files, a young soldier who died a hero, but whose sacrifice could never be publicly acknowledged. What kind of promise? That I'd never stop flying, that I'd never let fear keep me on the ground. Sarah's voice grew stronger as she spoke. "Mike used to say that true skill speaks louder than assumptions, that the sky doesn't care about your rank or your uniform, only about your ability to fly. True skill speaks louder than assumptions." Harrison recognized the phrase that had become legendary within Phoenix Squadron, words that embodied their philosophy of excellence over appearance. "And you haven't flown since the mission, not once, until today." Harrison understood the significance of what Sarah was asking. She wasn't just requesting simulator time, she was trying to honor a fallen comrade and reclaim a part of herself that had been lost in the desert of Afghanistan. "Those two lieutenants outside," Harrison said, "they don't know who you are." "And I'd prefer to keep it that way," Sarah replied. "I just want to fly one more time, for Mike." Harrison made a decision that would change everything for everyone involved. "Ma'am, I think it's time we got you into that simulator. And I think those lieutenants are about to learn that true skill speaks louder than assumptions." The simulator bay hummed with the electronic sounds of advanced training equipment as Air Marshal Harrison led Sarah through the facility, past banks of computers and flight controls that represented millions of dollars in military technology. The air was cool and sterile, carrying the faint scent of electronics and the ozone smell of high-powered equipment. Lieutenant Thompson and Rodriguez looked up in surprise as Harrison approached with Sarah, their expressions shifting from confusion to alarm, as they realized their delaying tactics had attracted the attention of the base's senior officer. "Gentlemen," Harrison said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that made colonels nervous, "I believe you've been keeping this lady waiting for quite some time." "Sir, we were just verifying her credentials," Thompson replied, his earlier swagger replaced by the nervous energy of someone who had been caught in deliberate obstruction. The authorization seemed unusual. "Unusual how?" Harrison asked, his tone suggesting that the answer would determine the future of both lieutenants' careers. Rodriguez stepped forward, apparently deciding that honesty was his best option. "Sir, with respect, She's a civilian woman asking for Apache simulator time. We've never had a request like this before. And that justified making her wait in the lobby for 6 hours? Sir, we were being cautious, Thompson said, though his voice lacked conviction. The Apache simulator requires— I know what the Apache simulator requires, Lieutenant. Harrison interrupted, his voice taking on the edge that had once made enemy pilots change course. What I want to know is why 2 flight instructors thought they had the authority to override authorization from SOCOM. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the steady hum of the simulator equipment and the distant sound of aircraft operations outside the building. "Ma'am," Harrison said to Sarah, "would you like to proceed with your simulator session?" "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, her voice steady, despite the obvious tension in the room. Thompson and Rodriguez exchanged glances, both men realizing that their careers might depend on how they handled the next few minutes. The simulator bay's overhead lights cast harsh shadows across their faces as they prepared for what they assumed would be a disaster. Sir, Thompson said carefully, "If this lady has never flown an Apache before she could damage the simulator equipment. These systems are extremely sensitive." "Lieutenant," Harrison said, his voice carrying the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence, "you will prepare the simulator for operation and provide whatever assistance is requested. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir," both lieutenants replied in unison, their earlier arrogance replaced by professional compliance. As Sarah approached the Apache simulator, Thompson couldn't resist one final comment. "Ma'am, the controls are extremely complex. If you need help with basic flight procedures—" "I'll manage," Sarah said quietly, settling into the pilot seat with movements that were both familiar and precise. The Apache simulator cockpit was a perfect replica of the actual aircraft, complete with every switch, display, and control that a pilot would find in the real thing. The seat adjusted to Sarah's frame with mechanical precision, while the helmet and display systems activated with electronic chirps and beeps. Thompson and Rodriguez watched from the control booth as Sarah ran through pre-flight procedures with a speed and accuracy that made them exchange worried glances. Her hands moved over the controls with the kind of muscle memory that came from thousands of hours of flight time. "Sir," Rodriguez whispered to Harrison, "she's running the checklist faster than most of our qualified pilots." "Is she doing it correctly?" Harrison asked. "Perfectly. Every step, every sequence exactly by the book." Sarah's voice came through the intercom system as she completed the pre-flight sequence. "Control Phoenix 6, ready for startup." The call sign hit Thompson and Rodriguez like a physical blow. Phoenix 6 was a legend in military aviation circles, a pilot whose exploits had become the stuff of whispered stories and classified briefings. "Did she just say Phoenix 6? Thompson asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Harrison smiled, understanding that the 2 lieutenants were about to receive an education they'd never forget. "Gentlemen, I suggest you pay close attention. You're about to witness something extraordinary, and you're about to learn that true skill speaks louder than assumptions." As the simulator's engines spooled up and the virtual Apache came to life under Sarah's expert control, Thompson and Rodriguez realized that their assumptions about the quiet civilian woman had been catastrophically wrong. They were about to watch a legend return to the sky and learn a lesson they would carry for the rest of their careers. The Apache simulator came alive under Sarah's touch like a sleeping giant awakening from years of slumber. The virtual aircraft responded to her inputs with the kind of precision that spoke of an intimate understanding between pilot and machine, while the simulator's sophisticated motion systems provided realistic feedback that made the experience nearly indistinguishable from actual flight. Phoenix 6, you are cleared for takeoff, Harrison said into the control booth microphone, his voice carrying the formal authority of air traffic control. Sarah's response was immediate and professional. Control Phoenix 6, lifting off. The virtual Apache rose from the simulated airfield with a smoothness that made Thompson and Rodriguez lean forward in their observation seats. They'd seen hundreds of pilots use the simulator, but none had demonstrated the kind of natural grace that Sarah was displaying. "Jesus!" Thompson whispered, watching the flight displays that showed Sarah's control inputs. "Look at her collective and cyclic movements. They're perfectly coordinated." "That's not possible," Rodriguez replied, his voice filled with disbelief. "It takes years to develop that kind of muscle memory." On the main display screen, the virtual landscape of Arizona desert scrolled past as Sarah guided the Apache through a series of basic maneuvers that quickly escalated into something far more complex. She was flying the aircraft as if it were an extension of her own body, making adjustments that seemed to anticipate the simulator's responses before they occurred. Control Phoenix 6, requesting permission for advanced maneuvering. Sarah's voice came through the intercom with the calm professionalism of someone completely at home in the cockpit. Harrison looked at Thompson and Rodriguez, both of whom were staring at the flight displays in growing amazement. "Gentlemen, any objections to advanced maneuvers?" "Sir, the simulator has safety protocols," Thompson said weakly. "If she pushes the aircraft beyond normal parameters, the simulator can handle anything she can throw at it," Harrison replied. "Phoenix 6, you are cleared for advanced maneuvering." What followed was a display of rotary wing aviation that redefined what the observers thought was possible. Sarah guided the virtual Apache through a series of maneuvers that seemed to violate the laws of physics' knife-edge passes between virtual canyon walls, inverted flight that shouldn't have been possible in a helicopter, and combat maneuvers that looked like they'd been choreographed by someone who understood the aircraft's capabilities better than its designers. "How is she doing that?" Rodriguez asked, his voice filled with awe as he watched Sarah execute a maneuver that involved flying the Apache backward through a simulated valley while maintaining perfect altitude control. "Experience," Harrison replied simply. "The kind of experience that comes from flying missions where failure isn't an option." Control Phoenix 6, requesting combat scenario. Sarah's voice remained calm despite the complexity of the maneuvers she'd been performing. Harrison activated the simulator's most challenging program, a scenario based on actual combat operations in Afghanistan, complete with enemy fire, multiple objectives, and time constraints that had defeated most qualified Apache pilots. The virtual landscape transformed into a hostile environment filled with enemy positions, surface-to-air missiles, and a downed friendly aircraft that needed immediate extraction. It was the kind of scenario that typically required multiple attempts to complete successfully. Sarah approached the mission with the same calm professionalism she'd shown throughout the flight, but now her movements took on the deadly precision of someone who'd faced similar situations in real life. The virtual Apache became a weapon in her hands, dancing through enemy fire while delivering precise strikes against targets that threatened the extraction zone. "She's not just flying the aircraft," Thompson observed, his voice filled with growing respect. "She's thinking 3 steps ahead of every threat." "That's what separates good pilots from legends," Harrison replied, watching as Sarah executed a maneuver that involved using the Apache's rotor wash to create a dust cloud that concealed her approach to the extraction zone. The scenario reached its climax when the virtual enemy forces launched a coordinated attack designed to overwhelm any single aircraft. Surface-to-air missiles streaked through the digital sky while enemy fighters closed in from multiple directions, creating a situation that should have been impossible for one pilot to handle. Sarah's response was to do something that made everyone in the control booth hold their breath. She flew the Apache directly into the center of the enemy formation, using the aircraft's agility and her own skill to turn the enemy's numerical advantage against them. "She's using their own missiles against them," Rodriguez said in amazement, watching as Sarah maneuvered the Apache so that enemy missiles struck their own aircraft instead of her helicopter. "It's called the Phoenix Maneuver," Harrison said quietly. "It was developed by one pilot during a classified mission in Afghanistan. Until now, only one person had ever successfully executed it." The virtual battle ended with Sarah's Apache emerging victorious from what should have been an impossible situation, the extraction complete, and all objectives achieved with a level of skill that left the observers speechless. Sarah brought the virtual Apache back to the simulated airfield with the same precision she'd shown throughout the flight, the aircraft touching down with barely a vibration, despite the complexity of the mission she'd just completed. "Control Phoenix 6 on deck," she said, her voice carrying no trace of the stress that should have accompanied such an intense flight. "Mike, that one was for you." As the simulator powered down and Sarah removed her helmet, Thompson and Rodriguez found themselves looking at her with completely different eyes. The quiet civilian woman they dismissed as a wannabe pilot was clearly something far more extraordinary. "Ma'am," Thompson said, his voice filled with genuine respect, "I owe you an apology. I've never seen flying like that. You've shown me that true skill speaks louder than assumptions." "Neither have I," Rodriguez added, "and I've been instructing Apache pilots for 5 years. I was wrong to judge you based on appearances." Sarah stood up from the pilot seat, her movements showing no sign of the physical stress that typically accompanied such an intense simulator session. "Thank you for the opportunity to fly," she said simply. "Sometimes we all need reminders that excellence comes in unexpected forms." "Ma'am," Harrison said, "that was the most extraordinary display of rotary wing aviation I've ever witnessed. Would you consider returning to active duty?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, her eyes reflecting memories of missions that would never be officially acknowledged. "I made my promise to Mike," she said finally. "Now it's time to let someone else carry the torch." As Sarah prepared to leave Desert Ridge Air Base, she carried with her the satisfaction of knowing that she'd honored her fallen comrade and proven that some skills never fade, no matter how long they remain dormant. The Apache Simulator Bay had been transformed into an informal shrine to excellence, its walls now adorned with photographs and stories of legendary military aviators. At the center of the display was a simple plaque that read, "In memory of Staff Sergeant Michael Torres," And all those who serve in silence, true skill speaks louder than assumptions. Lieutenant Thompson, now significantly humbler than he'd been 3 months earlier, stood before a group of new flight students, his voice carrying the respect that came from having witnessed true mastery. "Before you begin your training," Thompson said to the assembled pilots, "I want to tell you about a lesson I learned about assumptions and respect. 3 months ago, a quiet woman in civilian clothes asked to use this simulator. My partner and I dismissed her as just another wannabe pilot." The students listened intently as Thompson recounted the story of Sarah Chen's visit, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd learned an important lesson about humility and recognition. That woman turned out to be Phoenix 6, one of the most legendary pilots in military aviation history. She flew missions that officially never happened, saved lives that could never be publicly acknowledged, and demonstrated skills that redefined what we thought was possible in rotary wing aviation. Lieutenant Rodriguez, who'd been reassigned but had requested permission to attend the briefing, nodded in agreement. His presence served as a reminder of the consequences of prejudice and disrespect, but also of the possibility of redemption through learning. "The point of this story," Thompson continued, "isn't just about recognizing skill when you see it. It's about treating everyone with the respect they deserve, regardless of how they look or what assumptions you might make about them. As Phoenix 6 taught us, true skill speaks louder than assumptions." Air Marshal Harrison, who'd made the story of Sarah's visit part of the mandatory training curriculum, watched from the back of the room with satisfaction. The incident had transformed the culture of Desert Ridge Air Base, creating an environment where excellence was recognized and respected regardless of its source. "Sir," asked one of the students, "did Phoenix 6 ever return to active duty?" "No," Thompson replied. "She fulfilled her promise to her fallen comrade and then disappeared back into civilian life. But her legacy lives on in every pilot who remembers that excellence comes in unexpected forms, and that the greatest honor we can show to legendary pilots like Phoenix 6 is to approach our own training with the humility and dedication that marks true professionals." The quiet civilian woman who'd asked to fly the Apache simulator had left behind more than just an extraordinary flight record. She'd left a lesson about respect, recognition, and the importance of honoring those who serve in silence.